joining us. My name is Ayo. I hope you like that introduction because Terry worked really hard on that. And I am your host and executive producer for this podcast. Welcome to this, our first episode of Just Politics, Our World View, where we discuss all things political in Barbados, the region, and the rest of the world. As you join us, please share this live, especially in as many groups as you can, to help us to reach as many viewers as possible. Special thanks to those of you who were helping to promote this show by sharing it all week. And I really want to make a special mention, or rather special mentions of Kurt Green, Sharice King, and Sluggy Dan. You guys are the real MVPs. You've been sharing almost every post multiple times. And I just want you to know that I see you and I really appreciate the support. But now let me introduce you to my co-host, Dr. Terry Harris, or Terry as we call him here. Hi, Terry.
Hi, Ayo. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the show. So, as Ayo said, I'm Terry Harris, and I'm co-host and producer of Just Politics with Ayo, right, our worldview, right? I'm very happy to welcome you to the show, to our show. So before we get going, just a little background about how our show is going to be structured. So our show is resting on two main pillars, two main segments of the show. We'll begin with an interview, and this week we have Dr. Tennyson Joseph for the interview, and then a discussion where we will be discussing current affairs, political events. We're going to take a liberal viewpoint or standpoint, right? So the show, two main segments, the interview, where we will have a guest, some person of interest to the public, a writer, a politician, a scholar, interview this individual, and then a general discussion on current events and political affairs, again, from a liberal point of view. So this week, like I said, we have Dr. Tennyson Joseph, who's promoting his new book. Let me see if we can get that up for you so you can see it. Share. So we have Dr. Joseph, who's promoting his new book, Defending Caribbean Freedom, which is available at the University of the West Indies Bookshop. So Dr. Joseph is a St. Lucian resident in Barbados, who currently serves as a senior lecturer in political science in the Department of Government, Sociology, Social Work, and Psychology of the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus. Dr. Joseph, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you. I'm Terry, and Ayo, thank you for having me as your guinea pig today. So I know a lot depends on how today goes. So I welcome the opportunity to share, and thank you for having me. And also let me congratulate the two of you, because I think the world in which we are living is one in which there are multiple forms of communication. I think I was reflecting when you all were speaking and thinking that in the 1970s and 60s, you might have some people in a room rolling out what is called a gestetner machine. I'm sure you all don't know what a gestetner machine is.
No,
to roll out,
no,
right, to roll out an old newspaper and so forth. But now we have the means where we can communicate without the mainstream media intervening between us. And I think it's a very useful project. So I'm happy to support it, and I'm happy to be here as well.
Thank you for those kind words, Dr. J. Okay, this evening we were also supposed to have with us a special guest, Mr. Kenrick Kwashi from St Vincent and the Grenadines. He's not with us as yet, and I don't think he's going to make it given the time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Dr. Joseph to answer some of the questions that I would have prepared. Well, both of us, Terry would have asked Dr. J, those questions how you want to, that we would have prepared for Mr. Kwashi. Is that okay with you, Dr. J?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll try my best. And hopefully what we can do is have a discussion. I don't want it to be as if I am on some mountain top talking to anybody, but we'll share our information and we'll have our discussion. So that might be the best way to go forward.
Yes, and I also, your friend Ursula Holder, you remember Ursula from university? She's here having a ball at you.
Okay, don't do that because when you start asking about individual names, remember, we know
Rasta girl. Rasta girl.
I know who she is. Yeah, I'm sure I do. What I see the face.
Okay, great. Yeah. So thank you, Nikki. Thank you. Yes, the intro is definitely awesome. All right. So what I want to do right now is to go to a commercial. Yes, we have those. This episode, I just want to remind you that this episode is brought to you this evening by Desiree Properties Inc., constructing the future for all your construction, interior design, and decorating needs. You can call 624-0593 or email desireepropertiesinc@icloud.com. All right. So, Dr. J, as I said before, we'll get to your book in a little while, but we're just going to talk about the election that is fast approaching right now in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Nomination day, I think, is on the 20th of October, 2 days away, and then the residents will go to the polls on the 5th of November. Sorry, 20th of October is the nomination, and the 5th of November would be the election. I was going to ask Kwasi what's happening on the ground. I know that you're in Barbados right now, so I can't even ask you what's happening on the ground. But how do you think this election is going to pan out? What are your thoughts right now on that election? I know you're following as a political scientist. I know that you're following.
Right. What is really interesting to me in this election, the one coming up in St. Vincent, is the fact that I think the last 2 or 3, we've had very, very close elections. In particular, the last 2, I think the ruling administration has been administering with a 1-seat majority. If you take a look, if you take a kind of a pictorial look at the electoral map in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you will see it split right down the middle with red and yellow, literally down the middle. And of course, so what has happened in the last 2 elections is that I think the ruling party has been able to carefully orchestrate its campaign to win at least the minimum number of seats that it requires. And a lot of people have been referring to them as close elections. They have been close, but given the result the last few times being the same thing as we've seen, it suggests that the campaign strategy has always been to consolidate around the seats that they know that they have, and basically to do enough to win the election, given the nature of the politics in St. Vincent. What is going to be curious this time around? Well, 2 things that are really curious this time around. The Prime Minister, Dr. Gonzalez, is going for a 5th term. And also there is a new leader of the opposition. So his previous victories have come against Annie Eustace, who I think retired from electoral politics. And so for the first time, he's facing a new opposition leader. So what is really, really interesting to me is the extent to which the country is willing to go with Dr. Gonzalez for this what would be an unprecedented number of consecutive victories. And it's hard on paper, given the fact that we have healthy 2-party political systems in most of our Caribbean countries, but particularly in St. Vincent, the closeness of these elections would suggest that the electorate would have been wanting to send a message to indicate that they are almost on the verge of changing the government, but something has been stopping them. That's how I would have been reading it, and it's happened on 2 or 3 occasions. So what has been the factor stopping them? One may conclude it might have to do with the leadership of the NDC and the ministers, and if that is a factor, then that factor no longer holds in this election. The other difficulty would obviously be, can you give the ruling administration a 5th consecutive term? And that, I think, is another hurdle that I think would have changed the equation slightly. What I can tell you, though, and I'm speaking in a very broad way about why I think Ralph's party has been able to maintain its dominance, I would say in terms of leadership, first of all, its technical abilities have been proven. They have shown a capacity to present a kind of very skilled technical understanding of the issues confronting the Caribbean and Vincentian society. And St. Vincent has been providing leadership in relation to Caribbean interventions on a number of questions. Also technically too, in terms of the global challenges of the economy. So the big thing in the last election was this airport, which you can call a kind of modernization of the economy of St. Vincent, putting it on a new platform towards tourism and so forth. So when I speak of the technical skill, these are the kind of things I've been referring to. You can go to a library and pull papers that Ralph Gonzalez would have written on the economy, on what he would call a multi-sided economy, and how he would offer explanations as to what he's trying to do in relation to positioning his country in relation to the global challenges that we are all facing. I'm not sure we have heard that kind of technical thing coming from the opposition. And the other thing I would say, and that's the last point I'll make, in relation to leadership and blooding the party. So whenever you look into the ULP, Ralph's party, you can see 2 or 3 tiers of future leaders, and it's done consciously. So even right now, Camilo Gonzalez looks like a leader. The Minister of Agriculture, Siboto Caesar, looks like a future leader, and that is and in a context where I think Ralph would have hinted on more than one occasion that perhaps he might run the election as leader, but somewhere in the middle of this coming term, concede the leadership to somebody within his party. All of those things suggest a kind of conscious, deliberate, and technical way in which they're shifting both the party and the country type of opportunistic opposition politics. So things like on the let's say the Venezuela issue, particularly last election, it was built around the personality of Ralph Gonzalez, and almost 90% of the effort has been targeting Ralph Gonzalez and his personality, and that has not worked. So it would be interesting to see what I think last election would have been the highest point of that. I can't imagine them coming at him at a personal level with things worse than they did in the last election. So that strategy, I would have suggested, would have failed. But I have not paid sufficient attention, I should admit, to hear the new kinds of discourses that have been coming out of this election in St Vincent. I would say, though, that I have not been hearing them, because last election, they were coming at us. All over the region, we were hearing what the opposition was throwing at Gonzalez. But this year is a very muted election in relation to the kinds of strategies and approaches that the opposition will be coming with. And one last point, colleagues, I'm very sorry, the COVID question. I forgot the COVID question. The COVID question is the critical question.
You're actually answering all the questions before I answer them, but that's fine, you go right ahead.
Right, the COVID question, because obviously COVID is the macro context in which those elections are taking place. Now, what we have seen in a number of Caribbean countries, I can speak to St. Kitts and I can speak to Trinidad and Tobago. I would suggest that what we have seen almost gives the impression that the ruling administrations can use COVID to their advantage. So in St. Vincent, we saw it very clearly in the sense of flights can't come in, and some in St. Kitts and Nevis. And a lot of the opposition, Douglas's tactic would have been to fly in supporters to vote and so forth. And those things were heavily controlled. The pace of meetings, the number of meetings. I'm not sure that's happening in St. Vincent. But what I can tell you, and we saw it in Jamaica, extremely low voter turnout, I think the government wanted 37% of the national vote voted the government in Jamaica. So I think the COVID factor so far appears to be assisting governments. I think the only way COVID can work against governments is if there's a major crisis. And so far we have not seen a major crisis. And these are the factors. These are the 3 factors I think that we can think about. The fifth term issue, the new opposition leader for the NDC, and the COVID question. And these are the kind of things I think that might play out on people. If Ralph has announced that he's not going to go, and I'm not sure if he has in this election, but he has in the past. If he has announced his intention to step down somewhere in the middle, how that will play out with the voters, if they will feel obliged to give him a vote because it's a farewell vote and a thank you vote, and we're going to see the back of you vote, that kind of thing. So these are the issues that I think that might be critical for the Vincentian election that we're going to be seeing on November the 5th.
All right, I don't want to move too far past some of the things that you've said, because you actually touch on some of the issues that I wanted to touch on, but I want to go back to a couple. Let's look at the COVID question. And could you say that instead of this being a negative for the government can actually use the COVID condition, or the the pandemic to win the election. But right now in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the unemployment in St. Vincent is somewhere around 46%. Obviously, that comes out of COVID, but when people are in pain, people are in pain, right? So people don't want to excuses, but electorate is like, yeah, it's COVID, but so what? What are you doing? So, I mean, with that condition, with unemployment at 46%, does that put the government at a disadvantage going into an election?
Yes, but you're quite right, Ayo. The difference, though, is that if you can explain the unemployment through COVID, because it's not hidden. Everybody can see countries have shut down and tourists are not coming in. So if we have those sharp rises in unemployment, you can't really point to any specific government failure. So I think I was actually basing my comments based on what I've seen in the other countries. So if you maybe you all can help me tell me one that has lost under COVID. So far, it looks as if we've had 3 so far, right? Under COVID conditions, and they've all worked for the ruling administration. So I think COVID is a broad kind of, people understand COVID, as opposed to, it shifts blame away from leadership failures, and it's now a public health question. If there are no tourists coming into a tourist-dependent country, no government did that. The other thing too with COVID is that governments can also get some room for doing direct assistance. So in other words, very often in our modern economic discussions, people kind of frown on those things. But in the context of COVID, you actually have a legitimate context in which governments can decide, well, let us do special work program, let us extend the unemployment benefits for a longer period of time. So you actually have room for a ruling administration to actually engage in kind of direct, what we call beef and biscuit politics in our context, and can do it with some degree of legitimacy. Okay, so I think so far, these are the reasons why I'm suggesting that COVID may work in the interest of and there's also the other question is, and I'm hearing a lot of that discussion in Barbados, what would the other party have done? So we are the ones doing those things, and look at our ideological position on those things, and what did they do when they were in government? Of course, you can't use that argument in St. Vincent, because in St. Vincent's case, the last time the government was in, the opposition was in government was in 2000. But I still think there's room for a government to take credit for doing social democratic interventions. But in our context, package them almost in personal terms, as if, well, especially if it's done on a constituency basis and so forth. We know how our Caribbean politics works, that a lot of the things you do, a lot of the assistance you provide for COVID can be done almost as if is the government doing people a help, and that can work, I think, in government's cases.
Understood. Yeah. Just when you were talking about both Mitchell and Gonzalez spending, both of them spent like, what was it, 4 years each? 4 terms each, 4 consecutive terms each, or something like that. Yeah, they both served 4 consecutive terms. And you were talking about that earlier. What I want you to talk about is, does that argue well for democracy then? And should term limits be a conversation? I was really going to ask Kwashi. He was trying to get him, but he can't get him. But we'll talk to him another time. What I want to ask him is if there's a discussion going on term limits in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and what I want to ask you is, should term limits be a discussion? Do you even think that they should be, that they will be in our future? And do you think that they should be discussed?
Well, I know Terry framed his introduction by trying to put us all on a liberal. He's trying to put us all in a liberal.
Well, not all of us. The program, the host. The host.
Okay, well, I almost thought it was.
We have numerous people here.
I accept and respect. I was a little worried at first, trying to impose a liberal cloak on all of us. But
at least not neoliberal.
I know you aren't liberal.
Very good,
I know you aren't liberal.
I am very liberal, but the point is a good point you're raising. I'll tell you why I framed my response by taking a jab at Terry. A lot of us, we have this kind of almost mechanistic view of how democracy works. And among the mechanistic things, we say, let's have leadership, succession plans, and let us put term limits because it's a good thing, as you quite rightfully say. in our countries of the Caribbean, where you have extreme one-manism and
sorry, not crossing you. I'm not necessarily saying it's a good thing, because I do have my views on term limits. But I know that in extreme cases like this, I mean, we've had two prime ministers with 4 consecutive terms each, right? I mean, that is indeed what
I get you. But then the question is, my discomfort with it is, and you must understand, like, you see, in our resource-poor countries, do we have leadership is something that is very rare, you know. Leadership is a very rare quality, and it's a very complex thing. What constitutes the essence of leadership is a very complex thing. Now, when we begin to put mechanical strictures on that, to say you put limits on somebody serving, the danger is that it opens up the room for opportunism. So in a sense, I prefer to see it in an organic way. You see the same thing you described there? After 5 terms, he's going to get old eventually, and he's going, and so on and so forth. There are organic things that intervene. There's going to be new leadership coming up. We saw it because of Barbados. And I always prefer to see the politics organically adjusting to that. And it will adjust to it. The politics will adjust to it. Now, let us say something like the USA, which is the model of the term limit. First of all, the American system of government, we all know, is not really based on the principle of a people's champion. So then, in other words, the person who becomes president never can become a people's champion. The system of American political system is a particular capitalist economy that works. Look at somebody like Trump in office. The system will work around Trump, through Trump. You can have 1 term, you can have 2 terms, and so forth. In fact, one of the big questions about the American system is almost like the leadership is neutered. Instead of neutered in the sense that they can't really do anything. Obama can come and try and get his health care bill. Obama can leave, and Clinton wanted to do a health care bill. He came and went, and so forth. In our systems, a political leader, in a context of a social democratic environment of trying to transform formerly colonized societies, inherited from the British political system, a particular office called Prime Minister, in which that person had certain capacity, direct capacity to transform lives. In addition, that person is sitting in a cabinet with people around them. So the checks and balances that can be achieved through term limits can kick in other ways. The problem with our system is that because of the nature of the person, so in other words, you almost want to punish a very good leader for being a good leader, or you almost want to punish him for being head and shoulders above those around him. Okay, you also have the downside of a very weak leader. I can give examples right in Barbados. Extremely weak leaders, and that's the downs. So would you talk for a term limit on them too? In fact, the term limit on them is when they get kicked out in the election in a very direct way. So I'm not sure I can say yea or nay to your question. All I would say to it, Ayo, is that I have put it with a lot of caution, because it is a mechanistic intervention in the political system, and it can have dire consequences in our Caribbean. And I would also say the main concern I have is that it opens the way for opportunism. Okay, you may have square pegs in wrong holes, just waiting for the turn because there's a term limit on whoever is the Prime Minister, and we can come and get our turn.
So Dr. Joseph, what do you think about these 2 arguments, one for and the other against the same term limits? So for instance, one can make the argument for term limits in that, we could be arguing that term limits would prevent, say, a leader from getting too entrenched in power and becoming too familiar with the levers of power in a particular state. So there's an argument for it. And then there's an argument against this. If you institute term limits, you're denying the people their choice of leader. What do you think of these arguments, again, for and against term limits?
They're both valid. They're both very valid. But so the entrenching of a particular ruler in power is the main argument people present against it. In other words, you have one man actually controlling a system, and all the roads lead to the Prime Minister and so forth. That's a solid argument, but I'm just concerned that the cure might be worse than the disease. And given our resource poor countries, you might have a kind of let's be quite frank, and I want to go back to my discussion about leadership. Look around any institution. Forget the state. Look at other kind of institutions. Terry and Ayo, these institutions are run by certain types of people. The leader, when you walk into, if you walk in, I don't want to give examples, but when you walk into certain institutions, you can see who the leader is based on some very intangible things. Okay? Right. So that's Plato. I always go back to Plato. I know I would laugh at me for saying so. But Plato, in my mind, not at all. And I'll tell you why it's relevant to the by-election discussion in Barbados. He had outlined in a very clear way what he felt was political rulership. And he was insisting that political rulership is a specific kind of activity that is different from all others. That's why he was making the point that a businessman cannot be a political ruler, because a businessman, what constitutes his forte as a businessman is an entirely totally different world to the world of political rulership. Now, I raised the by-election because we heard some strange comments on the platform in Barbados about somebody referring to cricketers as, he said, any idiot can play cricket. Now, that was a dangerous comment to make if you're looking to win votes.
Yeah.
But the error with that was that it was a correct argument made in a wrong way. What it was because it doesn't mean that a cricketer doesn't have political skill. Because the man can be a cricketer, and Imran Khan went to Oxford and so forth and practiced and learned other disciplines to equip him for leadership. So I heard people refer to Imran Khan and say, but look, Imran Khan is the cricketer. But Imran Khan is not just a cricketer. So that's the point we're making. He's not just the cricketer. So it is, so when Plato was talking about leadership, it is, you can be almost anything, but you must have those particular attributes for leadership. So he wasn't attacking, that's why he was saying the workers and the soldiers are not businessmen, are not, political rulers. He was not saying that a soldier cannot be, doesn't have the tools for political leadership. He was making the point that let us extract what are the functions of a soldier from the functions of a political ruler. What are the functions of a businessman from the functions of a political ruler? So that is why, Terry, I'm answering the question now. I have a misgiving about term limits, because it is such a rare thing. The thing is so rare. You know, like an Einstein emerges once every how many years? So when you see an Einstein, you cannot just say, well, you know, give Einstein a short term and he's gone. No, right. You have to cherish that Einstein until you milk every last drop out of that Einstein, because political rulership will not emerge. You can't get it under every rock. So in our context, I approach you and say, I want to join your party. People like me and so forth. But Plato would be very suspicious of that. He'd be saying, no. Ask deeper questions about leadership and rulership and those kind of questions before we can determine whether you are a ruler or not. I think I need to turn my light on, Ayo. I'm getting a little dark. My lighting is poor. Okay, so let me just turn my light on. I'll be back in 2 seconds.
Well, I guess one implication of what Dr. Joseph was saying there,
that should help a little, I think,
is that the sign, I guess, of the next leader is their ability to overthrow, for the lack of a better word, the incumbent leader, right? So I guess as opposed to just allowing for term limits and then saying, okay, well, we need to find someone new. Perhaps based on the logic and the trail of thought you're having, the sign of the next leader is their ability.
Capacity, very good. That's why I keep using, very good, Terry. That's why I keep using the word organic. In other words, you're organically you will see that you're the leader. Right. And organically, based on how you conduct yourself, and based on your, as you rightfully say, your empirical, you will demonstrate it empirically, as opposed to having a piece of paper that says my turn next and so forth, and that is where the opportunism comes in, and then you might have bad leaders in that. Of course, the plus to the term.
What are some of the arguments for? What are some of the arguments for term limits, though?
Well, I was just coming to that. I was saying the plus to the term limit is when you have a bad leader. You get me? When you have a bad leader, then you can sit down and say, okay, he's not going to be impacting on us for too long. Okay, he's not going to be. So in the USA, the USA system works.
Exactly, because I mean, it's supposed they had a content for 7 or 8 years.
Exactly. We just have to hold our breath until November, and then it's very good. So that is the plus. That's the plus to it. But our system has ways of getting rid of bad leaders. That's the other thing too. That's why I keep going back to the organic question. So in our system, as a matter of fact, in the Westminster political system that we have, it's far much easier to throw out a bad leader because you can have an election at any time. People keep forgetting that you can have an election at any time. Once the representative majority say they don't want you, so at any time in the life of a parliament, you can have an election, as opposed to a fixed term that says it must come. So our system is not oblivious to bad leaders, and our system is not impervious to addressing the problem of bad leadership. So this mechanical thing about term limits, I want to repeat and insist on it, is the language of the opportunist. That's how I see it. It's the language of the opportunist.
Okay.
If I want to become the next CEO, I simply start biding my time and say, well, his term is going to come to an end, as opposed to me demonstrating capacity to run my organization properly and so forth.
Yeah.
So you think the next do you think the next election, this election in St. Vincent, do you think this is between Gonzalez and Friday again, or do you think the Republic, what's it called? The Republican Party and the Green Party, are they like our third and fourth parties here?
But you don't even know their names, so that should answer the question.
You understand?
You don't even know their names, so that should answer the question.
So
I also have this. That's another question. I keep making reference to the organic nature of the thing. I have a big problem with the way in which it's another example of opportunism. When we hear the third parties emerge. Whenever I hear a third party emerges, my first question to the third party or the people behind it, what is the new political economy that has given birth to you? And I want to explain what I mean by that very clearly. So if you look at if you go back to our history, we had our labor movement, you had Labour Party. So there was a new political economy. Colonialism was coming to an end. You had universal suffrage, and therefore the old colonial policy had ended. There was a new political economy that gave birth to all of our kind of countries.
To emerge.
Very good, Labour Party. Then, okay, I'm not saying that these things are permanent, but okay, let me give an example. So in the 1960s, they went Barrow from this party. Of course, there is a split there's a breakup in the ruling party, the BLP. But he is now articulating a new political economy of independence. Okay, so he's now, there's a new thing that has emerged called the rise of independence, and Barrow's party rides that wave, and it takes us to the future. I saw the same thing in St. Lucia, Compton and Lucas party. So before you had a kind of sugar economy, a banana economy emerges, and Compton's UWP becomes the banana farmers party, a new political economy. When the new parties emerge in our context, what is the new political economy that, and I was laughing a lot at the last election in Barbados, because our friend Glenville Phillips, he was saying things like, what is he saying again? You need solutions. So it is a purely technical textbook kind of, he took the language of management. What was he saying again? The public sector management.
ISO 900.
Very good. Which, by the way, is an extra Caribbean measurement tool for how you measure when change takes place. And he said, let's use that. So he's presenting a political party using a narrow management tool to determine what is new about his party. And you hear the language even a day like today. So he stands on Nelson. They're purely empty of ideological substance, intellectual substance, but he's a trained engineer. A very bright person, not foolish by any means. Trained engineer, of course, look at his skill now. One of his areas of strength is to look at houses and whether they can withstand earthquakes and so forth. And I'm hearing him in St. George. His program in St. George is to go to promise the people that he will do housing surveys for them, to look at it. That is not a program for a political party. That's a program for...
I remember seeing the program, and it was a strange program for a political party.
That's not a program for a political party. That's an engineer offering services to a population.
But he's offering what he knows, though. I mean,
yes,
so.
yes, but a political party is one of that. Which is my point about the third parties. So you have, somebody might have a few disgruntled people who were vexed with one party. You say, let's form a third party. A political party is a lifetime project, you know. It's a lifetime project. You don't. I'm vexed with Terry, and tomorrow I form a new party. There must be deeper substance to that. So I have to capture a historical moment. I have to read the new political economy. What is new about the new movement that means that the old parties are no longer doing it? I mean, I heard in one context somebody said, the same Granville, you have Tweedledee and Tweedledum. So because you have Tweedledee and Tweedledum, you need a third option. That is not an argument for a third party. When a third party emerges, because an old political economy has collapsed, that the old way of doing things has collapsed, and the existing parties no longer capture. So let's say, for example, if a new party emerges on the basis of a new technological reality, and I can understand those kind of things being a motive or an explanation for a third party. But the notion that I can just sit down, because I'm a very bright person, I call 5 of my friends together, we draft the constitution, and we say, let's form a party and so forth, put our names in. As a matter of fact, you shouldn't even put your name too early in the election. Why is it the first thing you do is put offer yourself up for election? If Terry and I have a political project, we build our political project, and we're not even thinking election, because election is the kind of end result of the political process. But the first thing we do is we start to organize ourselves for election and call ourselves a third party, and it makes absolutely no sense, and it is almost silly, it is time consuming, and it's a waste of time even discussing some of these parties.
You're offering no solutions.
No.
Solutions. Barbados offering no solutions. Okay.
But it's a kind of almost emotive thing to say. I can understand the ordinary layperson saying it, that they're tired of the two parties, and but it is too emotive. It is not based on anything substantive, because you have to mobilize a population. There's nothing wrong with being an interest group. There's nothing wrong with being a pressure group. There's nothing wrong with being a movement. I can support 1,000 movements.
I think that I think we do need more pressure groups.
Exactly.
I think that's what we need in the Caribbean.
They can spring up every day, and I would admire and support them. I could put them for hours. But when you start telling me the first thing you're going to do is to offer a group, a 3 or 5, and it makes no sense. It just doesn't make sense, because you will not win the election.
So what about the argument that these parties, these third parties, provide the population with a protest type vote to suggest that they're not interested in either party, and they're
yeah, but you see, because that kind of argument is because if you're locked, if you define politics, and by the way, a lot of the dangers we see, a lot of our polls just make that mistake too. A lot of our discussion of politics revolves around electoral politics. Electoral politics is a minuscule aspect of political life. The 3 of us engaging now in political action. We are engaging in political activity right now. When I go to the supermarket to shop and I can't afford the sugar, I am confronting a political problem. You understand me? So politics is a ubiquitous activity. So the question you raised, Terry, has to do with a protest vote in relation to the existing electoral system. But are you building a house to kill a rat? There are human beings involved. So as a professional, you're saying to me, I'm going to put everything on the line and run for, just to make that, I can make that point, and that point can be made in other ways. We can vote with our feet. People can, Lenin used to say the poor vote with their feet. Our protest vote can come from our abstention from the polls and so forth. So I don't necessarily, and you see, if they come to us and tell us
and that's
what
how
you
people
just said,
protest, they vote anyway. They do vote with their feet.
Or the ballot.
People don't vote for a third party in protest.
And by the way, Terry, none of them have come to us and said it, put it in the terms that you said.
Right.
They come to us telling us they're going to win the government and form a new government. You see, because they have solutions that. So it is a false premise upon which to enter the electoral system. It's just not. It doesn't make sense in my view.
Okay.
But Terry, you want to say something? Because I seem to be asking more questions than you were. Or can I go ahead?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I'll
Okay.
catch up.
I just don't want to be banging against you, you know what I mean?
Go ahead.
Dr. J, I want to go back to something that you said earlier, though, when you were talking about the comment that was made on the platform about any idiot can play cricket. I feel like I don't know if I've been desensitized. Because I actually thought that comment was kind of mild, and I don't know if I'm desensitized based on the last 10 years or whatever, last 2 elections that we've had. Because I've heard harsher things said on the platform. I've heard harsher things being said to the cricketing teams when they lose. And I'm not making an argument for the Barbados party. I'm really just talking about the outcry that's come out and the critique that's come out because of that comment. Is it being blown out of proportion because that we have like a singular focus now because it's just one constituency that's running? Because I feel almost as though this comment might have been lost in a sea of comments if we were in a general election. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's because you are involved in an election, and therefore the DLP is looking to win the election, and it will enlarge on whatever it chooses to enlarge upon. And I think in fact, the question you raised there is one of the points I was thinking about in relation to how the by-election has been conducted. And I want to make a larger point to answer your more specific question. I have been asking myself, what was the purpose for the by-election? And I've written about it, and I have argued that what I've seen is elements of mere motley, which I would call a kind of Machiavellian power play for its own sake, because you've won 30 seats in the last election. I felt that what has happened, she's given the opposition, she's energized the opposition. You won 30 seats, and in that context, to me, you have to show you have to show a little more humility, because I have my 30 seats. I would quietly go about my business, holding on to my 30 seats and implementing my policies. But from the time of the reshuffle, I began to ask myself, why is he ruffling up the political? Is it too boring? Is it that the DLP has been so properly decimated that she feels she can? And it began to first with the reshuffle, you began to have internal dissent. So some people felt hurt, some people felt marginalized, and then I felt the reshuffle was it, and then you had a by-election. And the by-election is why? Why is the by-election? To send Glenn Clark to Canada? There was no death there was no death. You mean you have so much skill that you can decide, well, Glenn Clark must go to Canada of all places. I mean, to choose an ambassador to Canada is such a commonplace appointment. Now I'm coming to your point. So what she has done is ruffle up the DLP. Now with the 30 love, the Barbadian public would start asking questions about authoritarianism, because it's like, let me give an example. So it might not be a good example, but I'll give it anyway. As a teacher, I try to give examples to illustrate my argument. We just hanged the old lady's grandson. He committed a crime. We hanged him. We would be pointing his finger at her and laughing at her on the road. We wouldn't do that. We accepted the hanging was such a terrible punishment. Now when we see the old lady, we bend our heads and we try to show her that's how the Caribbean consciousness works. We can't trust somebody too far. You have 30 seats. Even some of the appointments with the relation to the communications director and so forth. That's one thing. So you mean you have 30 seats and you're hiring somebody from St Kitts to be a PR spin doctor for you. But 30 seats is enough already. You get my logic? And I've seen that extended. So the point is, so what is happening? And I'm going back to the cricketing comment. It kind of amazes me that the by-election is being conducted and almost as if the DLP is on the defensive. So the DLP, the BLP is on the BLP should not be on the defensive.
Why do you think they're on the defensive?
Let me explain. I know. Okay. I'm talking about the discourse of the campaign. So the discourse of the campaign. So it started with Tony Moore, who I think is an excellent person to be an MP. But the discourse moved to whether or not she betrayed the Barbados Workers Union. So in other words, what I was expecting to hear on a campaign from a government that had just won 30 seats is for the government to come and explain its policies and to continue to extend the dissing of the DLP that began.
I'll be honest and tell you that I am missing that too. Yes, I think
right.
That
So in other words,
talking about what they've been doing,
so much,
why they're there.
They failed the country the last time, but you see, my point was precisely that. So they failed the country the last time badly, but in the context of a by-election where you have 30 love, that argument would resonate a little less. You know why? Yeah. Because you can't lose the government. Yeah. Because you see, if it's a general election, people are more vigilant because you don't want to lose the government. But now now that they have 29 seats, so let's still call them as 30 seats. So it's almost as if all the running is being done by the DLP, and that's my concern with the by-election. My concern with the by-election is that it was not politically necessary at all. It was not. Give me the compelling reason for the by-election.
Well, maybe the Prime Minister wanted to test the waters and see what's going on after 2 years. What
you testing the water with 30 seats? You testing the water with 30? You have 30 seats. You see, you have 30 seats. You're still testing water still?
What I would say though is that I really don't have a problem with Tony replacing Glenn. Yes, right? Glenn has been in politics forever. I'm pretty sure that this would probably have been his last election. And I mean, to get a younger, energetic woman like Tony with the background that she has coming out of the workers' union, I think that we really can't. Well, not we, but the country.
But my question then is: so why not wait for the general election? In other words, I agree with everything you said.
And I agree with you. I have no answer to that.
So I would wait if I want to replace Glenn Clark, 2 years. What's 2 years in politics? He let him serve out his term, and so in other words, there was no compelling.
But is the Prime Minister designing her party for the future, though? Because I mean, at the end of the day, as a political leader, you have to do that.
You see, why I keep asking about the by-election is because there's an opposition party. That's my argument. There's something called a DLP. So it's almost as if you assume that they're dead in the water. They don't exist at all, and I can now move my chess pieces as I wish. And so, but there's an opposition, and I think that's why the language of the election has struck me.
When you're saying there's an opposition, are you talking about the PDP or the Democratic
Party? No, there is a Democratic Labour Party. Let's not make light of it. I'm saying to you. Let's put it this way.
I'm not making light of it.
It is not. You cannot assume that you are such a powerful lord of the manor that you can begin to do what you want with the politics. Okay, look at the other side of the discussion. Following the throne speech, if you're doing that kind of radical throne speech, you need a united party behind you. That's my argument. But you're assuming that you can do the throne speech, go for republicanism, go for same-sex marriage. And there is no opposition, but what we've seen now is the civil society groups are now emerged. So in other words, it was almost as if the Prime Minister is rustling an ant's nest. But if I just defeated this guy 30 love, I would do everything to keep the context of the 30 love as set as possible into the next election. I'm not going to I'm not going to invite them to wake them up. You actually have a by-election where you have a weekly, a nightly debate about you and so forth. It is just a little bit it's almost too blasé, and I want to say a bit too arrogant and a little too cocksure and then what you normally find in our Caribbean context, when you're too blasé, a little too cocksure, the people always give you a reminder that they are. And I think that the DLP, to be quite honest, in other words, look at Villa de Pisa. When the DLP lost the election, Villa de Pisa was not on anybody's radar as any leader of any significance. She and Fennel Stewart Fennel was still miles ahead of her. But then she's almost been given. So when she defeated George Pilgrim in the contest for leadership, and the same week announced Floyd Rifer as the candidate, it's almost as if she's showing she can move. She has moved too. So in other words, now who is responsible for all of that? The person responsible for all of that is Mia Mottley by giving her a chance to mount a platform as political leader and carry a debate against you every. And Floyd Rifa is not a Papi Show candidate. My Sanusian language. He's not a Papi Show candidate. He's not a politician, and he is not somebody I would think of as having political capacity. But in the context of a by-election in St. George and a homegrown individual and so forth, she pulled a rabbit out of the hat, and she presented.
I agree with that. She
presented them with
a good enough candidate, and he was a good enough candidate. I'm not sure that he would actually be more,
agreed.
but I wouldn't expect them to come with that good a candidate. To be honest.
Exactly, because the same what I'm looking about underestimate. In other words, they were so dead that who of substance would want to put the name in that ring in a by-election, especially in a by-election where you're going to be in opposition anyway. So I think she has created a context where she has interfered with the politics a little too much, and has woken up.
That far, but I get the point you're making, because at the end of the day, I think that going back to what you were saying earlier, the Democratic Labour Party is the official opposition party of Barbados. And I understand what you're saying from the context of a prime minister, the prince should, hit people when they're weak, the Machiavellian thing of it. But as a citizen of Barbados, I actually like the fact that she's done what she's done, because the PDP is just the opposition in Parliament, right? But they're no real opposition, and we need an opposition. As far as I'm concerned, we need the Democratic Party to get back up and to become a viable party again. Now, they start to pull some people there, and you got to shake your head sometimes and wonder if they're really sure. Do you understand? I'm actually suspecting that a lot of the people that they're starting to pull are not going to go into the general election. I think they're going to start to look for proper candidates.
I'm not sure what you're talking about. You mean, when you say who's starting to pull what? I wasn't sure. You lost me a bit.
No, I'm saying the Democratic Labour Party. Some of the members that they're starting to pull, because they're starting to, show some movement and, and these types of things. And I still think that they have a long way to go towards rebuilding as a party and putting, because if the old guard come back, they're going to be rejected. So they really have to look for new people. That's how I feel about it. So, as a citizen, and going back to my original point, that as a citizen, I'm actually glad to see that there's something happening politically, that we're not just going to have 30 people for the next 10, 15 years with, the bishop in Parliament just nodding his head or whatever. We need, even if the Democratic Labour Party just becomes a political pressure group for 15 years. But at least
my advice is not to assume, treat the 30 level as an aberration, as an aberrant year.
I don't think they'll get 30 seats again.
Yeah, but don't assume
I personally don't
that
think
don't assume that they are so, because remember these are old entrenched parties too. I'm watching it in the by-election. I'm watching the crowds, not you can measure crowds. But the point is they were supposed to have been decimated in the last election. So, but they have a presence. They have a history, and they have a long history. Right. So let's not. Don't assume that the 30 love is a kind of norm. It will not be a norm, and that's why I think I might sound like a conservative.
I'm making, because I'm saying that this by-election has actually got them up and started to do something, because I think that losing 30 love is not easy. And I think that party went into the background and they were just licking their wounds and they weren't really and I think that this by-election has really given the opportunity to get up and do something.
That's my point.
The
political leader of BLP is not her business.
She should not do that. As a prank, she should not do that. I'm saying that as a citizen, I like that has happened.
Well, I accept that.
So we're saying the same thing, but we're looking at it from two different perspectives.
And a lot of people participate as citizens. A lot of people are going to engage in it as citizens, especially against the background of the little misgivings about the 30 love. If I were in her shoes, I would leave it alone. That's how I would have put my politics. I would have shown gratitude. I would have shown gratitude to my 30 love, and I would have decided that I would build a country of national unity and a party of national unity. So maybe that's the old the old communist in me coming out there. And I want a country of national unity, a party of national unity, and we're constructing our country together. And next election, let me see if you're ready for me. So that's how I would do it.
There's issues with that because I mean, like international organizations and so forth, they don't necessarily like one-party countries, you know. So
no, but we have general elections. There was not a one-party state. Barbados is a multi-party state. The problem with the political party didn't win the election because they failed badly, and people voted against them. But I would. So there's an element of humility there too, because you can't, because let's be quite frank, she didn't call a by-election for the reasons that you were suggesting. That's not why she called a by-election. She called a by-election because we haven't heard a full explanation yet, because the question I asked has not been answered because there is no compelling reason for it. But the point is, the surface reason for it is Glenn Clark has to go to Canada. That's the surface reason for it. But Terry knows, I can see on his face, that can't be a reason for a by-election. You understand what I'm saying to you? And so, there are deeper Machiavellian reasons. There must be Machiavellian reasons. And I say, in the context of a Machiavellian intent, she has had a different response. The country is seeing a slightly different response from what was expected from the DLP.
Dr. Joseph, I just want to pick you up on a comment you made earlier about the Prime Minister she may be doing too much, given the 30 seats that she has in the House of Assembly. But I mean, if you have 30 seats in the House, well, if you won an election with 30 seats in the House of Assembly, should you not, in that context, be doing a lot?
No, I didn't say she was doing too much. She's not. She can do a lot of policy.
Right.
She should be doing as much policy as she can. Address COVID, enfranchise the population. She can pass her laws on same-sex marriage if she wants, and so forth. But the politics, some people don't want. I wouldn't get myself just talking about politics, because the last political statement the country made was to give me 30 seats. So my hands I've been given a mandate not to do too much, Terry. To do a lot of things, and I'll be spending my time doing those lot of things, but not getting involved in cabinet reshuffle that nobody can really explain, or by-election that nobody can really explain.
When do you think the cabinet reshuffle couldn't be explained? Did you think that was necessary, given some public pronouncement?
The same argument I'm bringing about the by-election, is the same argument I'm bringing for the cabinet reshuffle. The explanations given didn't match the reality. What was the explanation that we heard? It was too big. There was a talk about the cabinet being, that is not true, because it wasn't shrunk entirely. If you said to me you wanted to bring in certain people because you thought that they had some skill, I could accept that. But again, my point is, a cabinet, just like a by-election, is a kind of too big a stick to wield to make the small point. The cabinet reshuffle was too big a stick to wield to make the small point, because you could have. So even the arguments about those people are not really gone, they're not really punished, that's not true. I mean, I was a cabinet member, I'm no longer a cabinet member. And if you notice, Lucille Moore hasn't come to the Senate since. That's a story that, I'm not a reporter, but that's a story I think the reporters in Barbados should be following, because I think it was, yes, they should be pursuing those kind, especially in a context where some of the recent Senate decisions, given the tightness of the thing, I call it unapologetically, I call it an obstructionist Senate, because the Senate is weighted in favor of the Democratic Labour Party. That might have been a historical accident or not. And let me tell you why I say it's a historical accident. Because remember when the Senate was first picked, actually hadn't crossed the floor yet. That was the dynamic there. So the Governor General, in her wisdom, probably assumed that the DLP, which is the majority party, had no representation. She wouldn't have put it in those words, but I put it in those words. Let me select people with a DLP stripe. Althea Wiggins was a former deputy high commissioner chosen by the DLP. Monique Tate is Branford Tate's son. Mr. Boyce is Boyce's son. So these are DLP. They do not meet the criteria of independent senators. The man from the church, Reverend Rogers, meets that criteria. Tony Moore met that criteria because they represent Labour. But so therefore, I'm going back to the Lucid Moore question. In that context of this obstructionist Senate, every BLP senator needs to be taking those Senate meetings very seriously because it is weighted heavily in favor of the opposition. Mm-hmm. And so her absence is newsworthy. I'm not a reporter again. You see that we always talk about, academics are doing their work and so forth. When the reporters are not doing their work, we can tell them so to their faces. They have a duty to tell us, to ask the questions, to raise questions and so forth, because she's been absent from, if we get an explanation that says she's been ill or something, but not in a context where those votes have gone against the GLP and where everybody, the BLP. The ruling admission has a full complement in the lower house, and its decisions have been blocked by a Senate. Yeah. So something is obviously wrong there, and so her absence. So that's another example, Ayo, why I'm saying to you, the reshuffle was politically risky. But that's why I made the point about unity. She had just won. She was supposed to be the master tactician that helped win the election. If or the other side to that is discuss it. If there's a problem with if I'm reshuffling my cabinet, I'm not happy with the way my ministers handle their ministries, I would say so by way of explanation. But I'm not reshuffling the cabinet and then say, well, nobody failed. That's the point I'm making to you. So the explanations don't match the reality. So it is just Machiavellian power play for its own sake. And it's a dangerous way to go about politics.
So I guess you see the current by-election in much the same context. This is a bit risky.
Yes, as the reshuffle, I think it's the same way. Now, in other words, it was not necessary.
Right.
Not necessary.
Can we think of this by-election as kind of a referendum on the governing party, though, on the Barbados party?
Well, let's put it this way: the opposition will treat it that way.
Right.
The opposition will. Every by-election is, by the way, every by-election is a referendum, and that is another reason why. That's another reason why you don't want to. Again, even that if you don't want to do badly in them either. So win or lose, and if you can win and don't win convincingly either. So you don't want.
That's an interesting point because let's take a look at the results last time. I don't know if you can see
I can see.
that I'm sharing. Right, so here we have the general election results in St. George North in 2018, and there at that point in time, the Barbados Party won a whopping 81% of the vote, winning every box in that constituency. Right, so. Can we say that the result this time is going to be a foregone conclusion with a massive 81% last election? You would think that they should be getting the lion's share of the vote this time as well.
Yeah. And as I said, the risk there is if you do not come, if you do worse than the 81%, of course there'll be legitimate arguments for that, right. Which is of course the long-standing Glenn Clark, loved by the community. Of course, I remember 2018 was also, we keep insisting on aberrant year. Right. So those figures from 2018 would be like an outlier, right? So, but the point is, again, it goes back. You see, if you had told me somebody had failed.
But Terry, got the other slide too.
Yeah, we'll go to that.
Go ahead. If you told me somebody had failed, or there was like the same thing when I had the cabinet reshuffle, that's what I was listening for. In fact, if I were a member of the cabinet, and had been reshuffled out of it, I would not accept any other explanation except that I failed. If I have a job, Ayo, I'm working for you, I'm no longer working for you. I have no other choice, but to conclude that I was fired because I failed. So therefore, that's why I said the explanations. One of the tools I use in my own political analysis, and I can share that with you. I always listen to the explanation because everything has a cause and an explanation. As long as the explanation doesn't make logical sense, I ask myself deeper questions about it. So I heard all the sweet talk about the reshuffle, but the reshuffle didn't match the reality. And the same thing with the by-election. what if on the other hand the Prime Minister comes to us and says, I wanted Tony Moore in my cabinet because I am building a future of the party, and Tony Moore is so and so and so, that has gravitas. But I would also ask the question, but I also think she could have waited for the, you see, let's put it this way, if the DLP had not responded the way they did, I would not be having that discussion with you, because I would be saying that she read the situation correctly in that they were so decimated that they could not have a response. But the reality is that they did have a response. So therefore, it means that you made a miscalculation somewhere. Of course, those people hearing my voice would say, but in the end, they're going to win. But right. I want to preface that by saying, remember what I'm saying, it's not even so much, winning is almost a non-issue there, given what we're seeing in front of us. But there are other factors, accumulating factors, including that would be what I said about the reshuffle and what I said about the by-election and what we're hearing about the through speech. So one of the things I like to do with politics is to see when the slide begins. When I say slide, I don't mean they're going to lose. It's one of the little private games I play. Whenever a government wins an election, I like this to the side and see what is the beginning of what is the end of the honeymoon. I like to do that, and then you can begin to trace where the honeymoon ended and to see how the government goes from there. Like we saw it with the DLP. The DLP, the last election, there was a long slide, and it began to do with economic factors and the leadership of Frederick Stewart. But there was a clear, the real crux of the end of the honeymoon was the decision on university education at K-Ville. And after that, it was, and notice that happened in the second term. They waited for the second term to make that decision. So it's something I do all the time. So I would say I've been seeing elements of a kind of, not risk-taking, but a kind of almost like a kamikaze overconfidence on the part of the Prime Minister and the by-election elements of that are manifesting themselves in the by-election.
So, but do you think you mentioned that you would be prepared to accept the her bringing in Ms. Moore to run if she gets a position in the cabinet and she sees her as a future? Do you think though that she will get a position in the cabinet, or do you think she's going to be a backbencher?
Well, again, we have to wait and see.
Right.
Okay, you see, which again would raise questions, Terry, about why. So let us say you had this nice big by-election for Tony Moore to leave her as a backbencher. I mean, I heard one commentator referring to her as a backbencher. I'm not sure how he or she might know that she's a backbencher. But I'm just saying that's my point about explaining the political action. So if you have this by-election just for special Tony Moore, because she's very special, and you have a by-election, you throw out Glenn Clark to send to Canada, and then leave out the backbencher, the stick that you're wielding is too big for the outcome you want to achieve.
Right. So, I mean, we could take another look at...
Before we continue, I think I need to apologize to the viewers because I'm new to this and I didn't realize that I was watching the video from an incorrect view, so I wasn't seeing your comments and your questions. So let me just apologize to you guys first. If Ursula wasn't so persistent in posting, I would not have picked it up. So thank you so much. See, this is why participation is important. Dr. J, you still there?
I'm there.
Okay. So there's a question here. I can hear you, yeah. There's a question here for you. And I think it went back to when we were having the earlier conversation about the term limits and so forth. And I just want to answer because we did ask the viewers to participate. So we want to give them the opportunity to have their questions answered, all right?
Yeah.
So Devron is asking, what does it say that, what does it say where a society says for 5 terms that an opposition cannot govern? We will reach a place where at any term, either an opposition or a government should be able to govern. This can't be achieved if an opposition has been out of government for 4 or 5 terms. He goes on to say that the question goes beyond just the leader, but the quality of the political class. Elections are a pendulum and oppositions will rise. How can an opposition be ready for governance if they were in the wilderness for 5 terms? When you consider political patronage and opposition, well, that should be, where you consider political patronage and opposition has nothing to offer and therefore cannot attract quality individuals, yet at some point the pendulum will swing. What does it mean for governance now when these low quality persons have to govern?
Well,
that was his words, not mine.
Yeah, I know. So he's making a comment about the quality of the candidate.
The quality of the candidate.
The quality of what you call the political class. And the quality of the political class, I don't think I have to do term limits or anything. So I'm not sure if Devon is implying that, okay, I don't want to misread Devon. I'm not sure Devon is implying that we should do term limits to give oppositions that are not normally worthy of government a chance to taste government. I'm not sure that's what, I'm sure that's not what Devon is arguing. But I think the point is, he's making a larger point about the quality of the political class. And again, that goes back to the nature of our political system. I'm so sorry for always bringing back Plato and so on. I remember when the lady ran, the lady who was the night worker, the lady of the night. A lot of my social worker friends had an issue with me, the stance I took on that. Because I kept making reference to, so why are you playing with the politics so much? In other words, she's a politician and she's running elections. Give her a chance and so forth. On one of my more angry moments, I said, well, make a CEO of Cape Shepherd then. Why not make a CEO of Cape Shepherd? Because if she can sit in parliament and represent the community, so why not make a CEO of Goddard's Enterprises? So in other words, you want to devalue the politics in terms of the quality of leadership. And Plato would be saying the opposite. Plato would be saying that thing we call political rulership is such a unique and complex thing that only the best of the best. I'm not sure we have to agree with this criteria of what is the best of the best. So now, Devon's question has to do with the quality of leadership. But the thing is, the quality of leadership, you don't have to be in government to have political leadership skills. It's not a school. The same way you'd have to go to management to learn business skill. The point is, leadership is something that is organic. And therefore, if I went up here for 15 years or 20 years, inciting my politics to replace the government, I get political experience. I carve a alternative framework. I learn to communicate. I learn to develop a program and so forth. You see, but if you narrow the discussion to, that's the other area with that view, you're narrowing it to a kind of plastic electoral politics, as if electoral politics is the totality of politics, and it is not, which is always my argument with the pollsters. Anytime you ask any question, I was saying that to a member of to a lady in the Nation newspaper. I was saying to her, but any question that anybody asks, the first thing you're doing is making a comment about, the person made a comment about elections. So let me give you an example. So if we're discussing if somebody asks about the throne speech, you say, oh no, it won't affect electorally. As if electoral outcomes is the most important thing. If somebody asks me about the content of the throne speech, there are 1,000 points of entry for political discussion about the throne speech and what it meant. But if I want to reduce it to, oh no, nothing wrong with the throne speech because she won't lose. I heard that comment more pointedly during the reshuffle. Oh no, nothing wrong with the reshuffle because she won't lose the election, as if the only discussions the body can have about a reshuffle is whether or not the government will. But after all, if a 30 love difference, we may as well close down all political analysis. So there are other things that can be said, as I'm trying to do with you now. So so Devon's point about pendulum swinging and so forth, I think Devon is focusing on electoral pendulums swinging. If a political party is entrenched for 5 terms in office, then there is something wrong with the opposition. Okay, and if it is entrenched in 5, and a matter of fact, if that doesn't mean I give up. And you were talking about it's almost as if, well, there's a limit to how much we can struggle against that, and let's give up. If it is in office for 5 terms, I can struggle for 30 years. Look at apartheid. You think apartheid? Look at that. You see again. If you're thinking electoral politics, that's the kind. So Nelson Mandela and them could never have gotten political experience to become a president because he was in jail and the blacks had no vote and so forth. So if you reduce your discussion to electoral politics, then you're missing 99% of what is the totality of politics. And it has to go wider than that. There are organic things that explain how those things work, and not necessarily only electoral politics.
Mm-hmm. Terry, you were continuing with the point you were making earlier. Sorry, I wanted to get in the comment from the audience. There are a number of things there, but I'll get back to those. Go ahead, Terry.
Well, I guess now that we're on it, you could continue with any other comments that they may have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it might be good to hear from them too, because they're part of our discussion. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. A lot of it is just people saying they love you, Tennyson, and so forth.
I say thank you.
So you can go ahead, and people want to hear about the book. We're going to talk about the book in a bit. We have, let's see how much time we have left. Oh, whoa. Well, we've been here for over an hour already. So I think we can probably, Terry, you want to make any other contributions before we move on to the book?
Well, I just had a further question for Tennyson concerning the election, because the by-election in St. George North. Let me see if we could share at this point. Right, so considering the history of the Barbados Liberal Party, Democratic Liberal Party performance in this constituency for the last, say, several elections, we have the results going back to 1986. So this is 34 years. And it seems to be very strong. St. George North seems to be a very strong Barbados Liberal Party seat, where the Democratic Party seems to perform best in box GF1. Given the discussion that we were having at the point in time concerning the massive proportion of the vote that Barbados Liberal Party gets in that constituency, and you're hinting at, you know, the Democratic Liberal Party, Barbados Liberal Party may not necessarily lose. What do you think will lose the constituency? What would you consider to be success from the Barbados Liberal Party perspective, and what would be considered to be success from the Democratic Liberal Party perspective in the by-election, given that we're not seriously expecting the seat to flip? At least I am not, given the historical performance in the seat. What do you think will be success?
Right, I'm not expecting it to change either, because of the history that we can see quite clearly in front of us here.
Mm-hmm.
I would say once Tony Moore gets in, I would say it's success, because the point of the matter is she's a first-time candidate.
Mm-hmm.
And both of them are first-time candidates, but the Barbados Liberal Party has offered a first-time candidate, and she has, just getting to know the people is itself a challenge in a context like that. So once the political objective would have been achieved once she gets in, and I would say, I'm being quite frank, Terry, that I would view that as success. I can't start talking percentages there, because I don't expect her to get as much as Glenn Clark got in the last, the 81% difference, because of the 2018 was a special year, plus Glenn Clark was a long standing BLP representative. So once she wins her seat, she would have vindicated the BLP for having the by-election. That I think is a minimal measurement of success there.
So if she wins 51%, that is success? If she gets
yes, because she didn't lose the seat.
Right.
If she loses the seat, it's a disaster it's a disaster, not a major disaster because it's government, but it would be a disaster in the sense of what it would be saying about the ruling administration. Right. So she has to win the seat. I think minimal. I say so because again, you can't take the electorate for granted. Once you win the seat, you have to be grateful for that. Whatever you get 51%. You have to show gratitude that you were able to win the seat. And again, it's the first time. So I think that would be the minimal measurement. The DLP. I would almost go as far as arguing, Terry, that they've achieved success already, in that they've woken up. I'm very serious about it. The week of the. Because remember the 30 Love was a very rare thing. Eh? The 30 Love where you want 2 boxes in a whole island is a terrible defeat. And of course, the 30 Love was not a reality until that night in 2018. So now before that, people could have said anything they wanted about the DLP, how bad it was, But the reality is, the empirical fact is that on that night in 2018, they lost 30 seats. So to a certain extent, they can only, anything they do now, they can come out. The only way is up, if you want to put it this way. Right. So I think they have done quite well in choosing a candidate. And of course, we will see the results. You're comparing Tony Moore's results with Glenn Clark's, but I think it would also be useful to compare Floyd Riffers with I think it was Colin Spencer the last time around. I may be wrong. Mm-hmm. So that might be a measurement. And I think it also Jepta in, sorry. And I think it also would contribute to the consolidation of Vula Dipiza's leadership. I think what they have done, the defeat of George Pilgrim and her decision on Floyd Riffers, both of these came in the same week. So it is perhaps her most successful week in politics so far. And I think on the platforms, she has been able to carry a useful kind of argument. You see, the other thing is, Ayo and I were discussing that earlier. I really believe that the campaign so far is the BLP doesn't appear to be in charge of the narrative of the campaign. So when you were asking me about the cricketing comment and why all the big fuss, it's because the BLP doesn't appear to be in charge of the narrative of the campaign. I heard one or two good things on the platform that I went to. People were asking questions like, you mean these people who mash up the country are coming back to you again? There are those who will say things like the warnings to Floyd that he's just a poster child they are using you. That kind of argument is a useful kind of argument. But I think what is difficult in this case, his campaign is not a platform campaign. His campaign is a kind of selling himself to the people on a homeboy basis, and it is hard to. So in other words, he's trying to fight the campaign below the political radar. At the matter of fact, he's not even a politician, so you can't even attack him as a politician, which is why I think the cricket argument backfired. If it were two politicians wrestling, then they would be fighting on equal turf. But his campaign is more or less to tell people, I'm from your community, vote for me. So in other words, his campaign, or the DLP's campaign, with him in particular, is more suited to a by-election, a small community by-election, than it is to a national campaign. That's why I think the narrative of the by-election so far, because when I listen to the BLP leaders on the platform, what they're doing is discussing policy that we know already. We heard on the news and so forth. So it's very edifying to hear, but it's almost as if the DLP is coming to report its work to the public. I would maybe too, they're afraid to take the attack to Floyd, but what I would do, I honestly, and that's just me talking tactics now, I would tie him to the failure of the DLP. So I would tell everybody, don't mind this fresh-faced boy and so forth, nice guy, and he's running for the DLP that destroyed the country and so forth. And what have they done between that? That's a kind of argument. But I think for some reason, I don't know if the advisors have sensed
trapped on the smaller issues.
Right, it may not work, so they don't want. It's hard to go to somebody's community and attack a homeboy. I know that I see it happen all the time. So if I walk into Terry's community, I don't know how the people next door think of Terry. So I can go to Terry's neighbors and start bad talking Terry in a way. So that would put me on the. So the short of what I'm trying to say.
In all fairness, though, Dr. J, once you put yourself on a political platform, you're a politician, and then you are open to the critique as a politician. And you're open to.
But it's a special circumstance. Yeah. We know that. I agree with you. Yeah. So I think that the narrative of the campaign. I'm actually answering your question, Terry. I would say that they have won, or they have achieved success already, because I see the DLP. The BLP is not supposed to be on the defensive in this campaign at all. And Tony is spending a lot of time explaining she didn't betray the BWU and so forth. The BLP is supposed to be taking the attack to the DLP and tying them to their failures for the last two terms.
So if just picking up on that point, so if the Barbados Party comes and wins 90% of the vote in the constituency, as a Democrat, would we still consider that to be a?
Oh well, that would be the end of flood reform. In
Right.
other words, that's a good question you're raising. So now you're asking me that question based on empirical data. So obviously if that happens, then everything I just said there was complete nonsense, and therefore the BLP would have won the argument. So you get my logic? So and it would have meant that, boy, that fella was looking real good, but the reality was it didn't work. But so that would be my answer to your question.
What are some of the factors that could lead to that type of an outcome? I realize that the governing party has been trying to push the idea of having debates and these things. So do you think that I know it's unlikely that the Barbados Party could increase their share of the vote going into the by-election, but what are some of the factors that you think could lead to an unlikely increase in the share of the vote in St. George North?
Likely.
Yeah.
Unlikely.
Unlikely.
Okay, you mean for the BLP? But yeah, I think okay. If it were to increase, what could account for that? Yeah. I would say, you see, if that happens, it meant that they would have had to have found something on Rifa,
right, that
made him absolutely unworthy of being in Parliament. Because the people in the, I mean, again, it's all anecdotal, but people are now saying that people are actually talking about him as, it's the kind of person that if you were to vote against him, your heart would hurt you because he's from your community.
Right.
So the only way that can happen is if there's something about him that is so abhorrent and so clearly unworthy of being in part, that people feel revolted against. But I don't see so far so good. I don't see. The other thing is I would carry the argument. It wouldn't increase it to 90%, but I would be making the argument that you don't vote for. You see, one of the reasons why the incumbent should have a chance, should win the election. People wouldn't vote to be in opposition.
Right.
If it's a general election, and a whole country is voting, a government may change. But in a by-election with 29 seats, the government will not change. So why would I go to the polls and almost people like to waste the vote? But why would I go and waste my vote in the first place when the government is not going to change? So that is a very strong reason why I think that the DLP will not necessarily, as we say, based on the history of the season and so forth, will not win the election. But the 90% scenario, I honestly don't see her doing better than Glenn Clark in the last.
I agree with you. I don't think that the current strategy of treating him with kid gloves, because as you said earlier, they're reluctant to really tie him to the Democratic Liberal Party any meaningful way. They're just saying he's being used for the most part. And the Barbados Party argument for the most part against Floyd has been that. But I guess what at the back of my mind I'm thinking is that the argument that we should be going in the direction of having debates may show him up. At least that's I think what the Barbados Party is hoping for. If that were to,
because if you put him next to Tony Moore is a seasoned politician,
right?
You can call her first time or not. She's a seasoned politician. I've seen her in action in the union. I mean, one of the classic things that sticks in my head is the way she handled what's his name, the troublesome trade unionist, the one in the PDP. Help me, Caswell Franklin. I remember once he was drawing an analogy. I don't want to talk a little bit naughty on your program. He was drawing an analogy about we said the way the unions treat the government. He said he has a little doggy at home, and when he goes home, he rubs his foot on the little doggy's belly, and he says, "Me, the more treat the unions the same way." And what's her name? Tony Moore is going to tell him, go and play with little doggy and so forth. So she's a skilled politician.
Oh boy.
I would be arguing that the thing about the debates, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to, but it will not work if the issue, because nobody expected to be a politician. People who are saying they're going to support him don't expect him to be a debater. I mean, he was reading his speech, which and he doesn't look like the politician on a platform. But the people who are going to vote for him are going to overlook that. So you're going to have the DLP votes, and you're going to have the community, you know, the neighborhood votes and so forth. So I would be making my case simply that I'd be tying him off to the DLP, because the people who are going to vote for him are extricating him from the DLP, and they're voting for him as Floyd Reefer. But right. I'd be tying him to the DLP. I'd be tying him to Fendel Stewart. I'd be tying him to the last ones we defeated in the 30 Love majority. Not even to Volodymyr, I'd be tying him to all of them.
Right.
Now the other factor is the Wood factor. And it's not a factor in the sense that it can affect the election. But I was going to raise that as an example of exactly what I was trying to say earlier. Almost as if the forgiving is taking place too early. And that is what I think the by-election has done. The forgiving of 2018, she kind of sped up the forgiving. So in other words, so look at us 2 years later. We already have Anthony Wood on a platform, because you'll have so much disarray from that. That doesn't mean Anthony Wood will swing the election one way or another. But I'm saying she has the forgiving, the forgetting and forgiving of 2018 has almost begun in this by-election. And that is again another one of my concerns. So the Wood factor, I think, would matter in that regard as an early indication of, look, they're already coming apart, and look, people are ready to forgive the DLP, because look, he's back with us. One of the MPs is back with us. So the man who campaigned for them in 2018 is already with us, talking how he's so unhappy with them and so forth. And that, I think, is again the by-election. These things should have happened in a general election.
Right. 5
years down the road, not so early in the life of a government that won 30 seats.
Okay. Well, Ayo, do we have any more questions from the chat?
Yeah, I have a question here. I'm being scolded for not asking it, but I think it may have been answered. I'm just gonna ask it nonetheless. Right. Damien is asking, I am wondering why Tennyson asked, why have a by-election? Why have a by-election? Is it not required? Could they go 2 years without representation for the constituency? And I think that is a matter of explaining how the whole...
No. I wasn't saying why have a by-election. Remember, Glenn Clark did not die, Damien.
Right.
He did not die. I'm saying he was asked to leave to go to Canada. So that's why. So when you ask why have a by-election, I say why ask Glenn Clark to leave the parliament to go to Canada is very the question I'm asking. In other words, why create the context for a by-election when it was not necessary? I'm not saying that they should have left the seat empty. That's what I'm saying at all. I'm saying the compelling reason for the by-election appears to be invalid to me. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it does. Terry, Dr. J, do you guys, it is now, we've been on here for over an hour and a half. It's now 6:37 and we came on at 5 o'clock, and we really are going to 7 o'clock, right? So I think we should move on now to the topic of your book, right? Everybody okay with that? Yeah. So let me just tell you, congratulations on this book. I think, obviously, that I told you this before, I thought it was a novel idea to just rework and compile your Nation newspaper articles into one publication. And for the viewers, the book is currently available for purchase at the UWI Bookshop. Where else can you get a copy, Dr. J?
Right. I actually should have prepared for you. The other place you can get it from is Carib Publications Inc. And I have a few copies myself that I can sell. But Carib Publications Inc. is a publishing house. One of the principals in it is Fally Brathwaite, former retired professor of sociology at K-Ville. And he should be in the phone book. And I think most you can get him through calling him. He also promised, he's a distributor, not me. And he had promised to put it in all the major bookshops in Barbados. So I think it's a matter of time. Fally is, at that point in his life where he doesn't move like the rest of us, but he will get it there. But if you really want a copy, you can get it from me, from the K-Ville Bookshop, and from Fally Brathwaite. Carib Publications Inc. Yeah.
All right. I just want to say that the book also carries, because I've been going through it since I got it, the book carries a really compelling foreword by literary giant George Lamin, and an equally compelling afterword by Professor Hilary Beckles. So it's worth it to get the book, not just for these for the articles inside, but also for those contributions as well.
Yeah, it's a little embarrassing to say, Ayo. Sorry for cutting you short. It's a little embarrassing to say that one of the selling point of the book is actually George Lamin's forward. And so
no, I'm saying, but it is the
because it may very well be one of the last. I cannot preclude those things, but as far as I know, one of the last public things that he would have written anywhere so far, and it was very pleasing to me. I'll tell you why. He used to be the writer in residence at the Cavell campus. And he would call me. I was very shocked the first time that I got this call from Carlos Springer telling me that George Lamin wanted to talk to me. And then it almost became a weekly thing for me, where I would go to his office and he would always have some critical discussion on my weekly articles. And it was his idea that I should put it in, compile them and publish them in book form. But I will tell you more about that later, about what the articles mean when you finish your introduction. Yeah. Okay. Unless you want me to speak now.
Okay, you can go on if you want to tell that story. I'd love to hear your stories. Go on.
Right.
We'll go back
so the truth is, what happened is I didn't want it to be just take the articles and put them in a book in the way that other people would have done. There's nothing wrong with that, but just that I when I put the book together, I was thinking a lot of my students. In other words, because remember, there are only 475 words. So one of the things that was most frequently said to me by people reading them is, why are they so short? But it's actually a skill, and I have a strong inclination for that. I learned the skill of actually condensing my ideas in 475 words. So people always say, well, you say a lot in that short space of time. But as separate articles, they wouldn't make sense in a book if I were to put them in as they appeared in the paper. So the real work of the book was I put them in themes. So the Caribbean economy, Caribbean society, leadership. I had a host of the themes, and all the articles I wrote that fell under various themes, I put them in there. And I really wanted it to be, because when I read the book, when I wrote the articles, I was thinking about thesis ideas. Because very often you have a lot of very bright undergrads, and they tell you they want to do an MPhil or they want to do a PhD, but they don't have a clear thesis idea. But in there, when I read it, I see several thesis ideas that, so you can write on leadership, you can write on Caribbean society. Of course, obviously, the main context in which I was writing the articles, and that's why they have a very critical tone. I was writing in the era of neoliberalism, when a lot of the strategies for development that our government had pursued in the 60s and 70s, and even down to the 80s, were being reversed. And a lot of our governments have been making policy and implementing policy with the broad macro intellectual context being neoliberalism. And I wanted to, I was always critiquing that. And the danger to me was, it's taken for granted nature. So if and that is really the essence of an ideology, that it is taken for granted so much, it is under your skin, that you don't realize that it is alien. So something can be alien and dangerous, but you're absorbing it as normal. So now a lot of my friends in econ felt I was being a little too critical of them, but I think the discipline that starts off, the most vulnerable discipline to being absorbed by alien ideology is economics, to follow my logic. So I was actively raising those things as red flags and saying, look at alternatives and so forth. And that, I think, is the real, one of the strengths of the book. I also wanted it to be a historical document. So in other words, if you want a statement of a kind of critical commentary, and I'm sorry to say it that way, but it's a fact, because they were written between 2008, 2010, and 2016. And the DLT was in government during that time. Yeah. So if you want a historical critique of the DLP, you can get it inside there. And of course, maybe the remedial response may be to do another one 10 years from now to capture another regime, but it was just a historical accident that the articles compiled about 2010 to 2016, right? And
yeah,
but
what I was sorry. Yeah, well, I just touching on what you were saying just now is that, you know, when I was going through it, I felt as though it takes a reader back through like our recent political history. And I wanted to note, I put a note here that it follows a theme of resistance to neoliberalism and the idea that we, the Caribbean, could be building our world according to our own chosen design and embracing the tenets of social democracy in deeper ways. So that's, you can tell me if that's
that's an excellent summary of it. And you know why I'm happy that, in a sense, that it came out the way it did? Is it because there was a world of difference when you're doing the criticism at the time. So a lot of what I was writing, it was almost nostalgic because I used to get a lot of hostile responses to it. So like the whole debate on free education, for example. Can you? I always ask people. I always ask. You were with us at the time when those campaigns were going on. I always ask people, and that's what I mean by hegemony and ideology. So where are all the voices that were opposing free education before 2018? Remember that huge backlash? People were writing in the paper every week, cursing University of West Indies, cursing free education. So where are those people now? So a lot of the times, where are those voices now? If these voices were valid in 2013, 2014, if the criticism of free education was valid in 2013, 2014, it should still be valid in 2020. So a lot of what passes as public discourse is partisan echo chambers. And that's why you have to always maintain your intellectual honesty at all times. We knew what we were saying, that we had to defend the free education for the same anti-neoliberal position that we were taking. We knew that the Barrow Revolution was to enfranchise the mass of Barbadian population. One of the easiest ways to do that was to give education to the mass of the public. But then a whole discourse began to emerge about University of West Indies and free education is a waste of time. So where is that discourse now? Something if EduTech 2000. So look at COVID now. So when EduTech 2000 was being run, a lot of nonsensical talk about children can't have the computers, when you're giving laptops to children for this so expensive, a foolish discourse. And then now you have COVID, you now realize, well, children now need their little laptops and their iPads, and having an iPad and a laptop is an educational tool that teachers can use to impart. So in a way, you always must maintain your intellectual integrity. Never be fearful of. If I said so in my introduction, actually one of the articles where I was stating to the public what my intellectual position is on those. In other words, I was stating out loud my philosophy as a public intellectual, and I will not. That will not change. That will not alter. Like I'm doing with you now. I'm not going to. I'm not. In fact, one of my favorite quotes is from Edward Said. He said, "Nothing disfigures an intellectual more than careful trimming and silence." It's like when you ask somebody a question, the person would say, "Boy, I can't say." You either saying something that you understand objectively to be true, or you. But if you start saying, "Well, I can't really say that," how you mean you can't say it? If it is, I always learn not to be disrespectful. If I made a factual error, I will come the next day and apologize for making a factual error and correcting it. I will not be like, I try not to be partisan. I'm only partisan in St. Lucia. I'm a card-carrying member of the St. Lucia Labour Party, and I say so to people. So don't try to pin a partisan label on me, because it will only apply to me in St. Lucia. Right. And they may come a point in St. Lucia to where I can take an independent stance too. But these are the general things that shape my approach to my public engagement and so forth.
Terry, just before you answer your question, I just want to ask Tennyson I just want to tell Tennyson that, and I do this on behalf of the people of Barbados, right? When I extend my gratitude to you for dedicating this book to us, right? Because I want to read the dedication because it really tickled me a bit. And I quote, "This book is dedicated to the working people of Barbados, who, in keeping with their quiet, proud, and unadorned nationalism, have accepted me as one of their own and have tolerated my voice despite the unfamiliarity of my accent and the sometimes unpleasantness of my message. So that's what tickled me, and I want you to talk a little bit about the unpleasantness of that message.
Let's put it this way.
I know what you mean.
I know what you mean too. But let's put it this way. No, I don't think anybody sets out to be controversial. And nobody does, because it's not a nice thing. I remember once I read Bethel somewhere saying that when the things he says, it's always shocked when somebody says it's controversial, because when I say the things I say, I don't know them to be controversial. It's only after somebody responds by saying, "What, he said that?" Then because it comes out naturally as you see it, but nobody really sets out to be controversial unless the person is looking for that kind of notoriety. It's actually a lonely thing, because you actually want people to understand what you're trying to say. You don't want people to reject what you're trying to say, because you try your best to educate people, to show them a perspective. What has happened is that there's a lot of partisan filtering through, not just Barbados, but the whole Caribbean. People listen to you with partisan ears. So in fact, it's kind of strange, because I'll share a joke with you. Right now, I'm meeting DLP that are telling me, I'm enjoying your articles. Now, a few years ago, these people were cursing. They'd be cursing you because they're assuming that you were a partisan person. But I honestly, to tell you the truth, in St. Lucia, I get so tired in St. Lucia because I live a partisan life in St. Lucia. So I can't go to a bar. When I reach the airport, whenever I land in the airport, there's a view that, oh, he's coming for some politics. That is a very tiring thing. So when I'm out of St. Lucia, I'm actually quite happy not being partisan. So I can do what I just did with you all tonight. I can sit down with you and say what I see about the by-election without feeling that I have a burden to, you understand me? Because sometimes being partisan means that some of the very things I say intellectuals shouldn't be. Being partisan forces those things on you. You understand? So the unpleasantness of the message has more to do with how people hear you than so much with what it is that you're really trying to say. What I try to say is that's why I believe a lot in explanation. So very often one of the errors with the article is that it doesn't give you a chance to explain. Like tonight, I raised a few questions and people ask questions. We can explain so they can hear the logic of what you are trying to. Sometimes people tell me my conclusions are too abrupt, which is true. My students will say that to me all the time. So I teach my students and I reach conclusions and they want I have to walk back. So it happens to be a lot when I give media interviews. My conclusions are almost too abrupt. So when I walk back and I explain what I'm trying to say, people understand me a little better. But the point is, it's not so much the message so much, but how people hear you, how people read you and so forth. How people see you and perceive you, which is part of the public, part of one of the downsides of public life. You just grow to accept that, and you learn to live with that. That's another feature, by the way, of political leadership. So when we were discussing earlier, political leadership, among the features of political leadership, that the person lives a very public life, and if you want a private life, you can't be which is a downside to go back. I'm going back to Grenville and them again. So it's almost as if the person wants to be a politician, but I'm going to be a technical person living a private life. But because of my technical skill, but you have to live a public life. Your assets have to be declared. Your family issues have to be out there. Your people have to see you almost as if they know you, even if they don't know you. But if you don't want that, then you stay out of that and you live a private life.
Fair enough. So I guess I should.
Terry, or you go ahead.
Well, yeah. So in the last couple of minutes we have for the show, I guess we have some questions on the book. So congratulations again, Dr. Joseph, on the book. So I guess the first question, given the title of the book, is Defending Caribbean Freedom. How do you define freedom, and what defending Caribbean freedom from? Like, what are you defending us from?
I love that question, Terry. Whenever anybody asks me how do you define freedom, there is I always go to Walter. Rodney had, in his book, Growing with My Brothers, he had three things.
Mm.
He said, you're living in a society that is reflective of the cultural practices of the majority.
Mm-hmm.
The political system is in the hands of the majority, and the economic system is in the hands of the majority. That, in other words, he was discussing independence. And he was saying, just by three, the cultural practices of society reflect the image of the majority. Is that true of our Caribbean? The cultural practices. Political power is in the hands of the majority, and the economic system is in the hands of the majority. In fact, there's another definition of freedom, which again, George Lamming ended, and I think my mentor, George Bell, used to quote it all the time. George Lamming ended in The Castle of My Skin with a discourse about freedom. And there's a discussion between two gentlemen about freedom, and one of them says, the language was to the effect that whenever you find yourself not free, you move, and say it's a natural freedom inside you that make you move, because free is where you is from the start. Mm-hmm. And that covers everything. That covers gender, that covers religion. In other words, whenever you find yourself in a situation of unfreedom, you know. Right. And you move, you respond to it. And then when everybody is watching you straight, you say it's a natural freedom inside you. Because you see, in the Castle of My Skin, somebody was saying, England make you free. Mm-hmm. Or a politician make you free, or Mayor Motley make you free. Nobody make you free, you make yourself free. Whenever you find yourself in a situation where you're not free, you move, you just move, and say it's a natural freedom inside you that make you move, because free is where you is from the start. And that's my definition of freedom. So in the course of the book, I was making the point that it's really a kind of defense of Caribbean sovereignty. Right. So I was saying we have our independence project. Our independence projects had several errors. They were limited in many ways, but we are engaged in a project of freedom. And what I was critiquing was neoliberalism, and how neoliberalism is reversing those freedoms, because it's a whole. Let me give you an example. I know we're out of time. Mm-hmm. I'll just give you an example off our head. So what would be my natural stance? So let's say we had a debate about food security. I've actually heard an economist say, I won't mention his name because I love and respect him. I love and respect all my colleagues at K-ville because they're my workmates. Mm-hmm. I've heard him say, it doesn't make sense to embark on a project of food security because it is cheaper to import food. Now that's an economist understanding of, a narrow economist understanding of food security, because he's watching cost and efficiency. If it's cheaper to import food, then why waste all the money on this thing called food security? But food security has nothing to do with only the cost of importing food. It has to do a staple grain that myself and you and Terry can eat in our own country, and that we can eat that for 25 years straight without relying on anybody else. And that's our basic. Now, of course, another view is, I heard another economist say, a very respected one, he said, oh, it don't make sense. It don't make sense. I won't mention his name either. Talking about food security, because we cannot give you all the vegetables and all the protein. Now that's a bourgeois notion of food security, because he's thinking food security, my plate must have protein and starch. You get the logic? My view of food security is a proletarian view of food security. That if it is, you know the Indians, they have something called mayok. Some people have rice. You understand me? Mm-hmm. Some people have wheat and flour. You understand me? And therefore, you can do what you want with me. I'm going to eat wheat and I'm going to eat rice, and I will not die eating rice. So you get my logic? And after we do that, then we can do the other things. But what's our staple? What's our staple grain? A civilization. Ralph Gonzalez in his book on Caribbean civilization said, every civilization has its grain. It's staple. Our Amerindian foreparents had their staple. They had corn, one of the most, the richest forms of starch. But again, I know, but I'm just using that as an example to show you the difference between an economistic understanding of food security, and these are the kind of things I would be doing in defending Caribbean freedom. I'd be pulling back from those very, very normal sounding views, but which in my view are very abnormal when you think of the larger question of Caribbean freedom and Caribbean independence and so forth.
So you mentioned neoliberalism as a potential threat to our freedom. What do you see as the main threat stemming from neoliberalism? What's the main?
Well, the main threat is the attack on the state,
right,
and the valorization of the private sector. Mm-hmm. Because what it does, it is a built-in ideology to say free market capitalism, and therefore anything else you say that is contrary to that becomes an enemy. So no matter what look at COVID-19, for example. COVID-19 is an argument against private. How are we going to, can anybody tell me, and Terry, you've been living in England, can anybody survive COVID-19 using free market capitalist norms, which is why America is in crisis? Mm-hmm. The very nature of COVID-19 implies public health care systems. So what are we discussing now? Individual protection. Exactly. So therefore, now if what neoliberalism does is to say all of those things are illegitimate. Oh, the state is wasteful. The state is inefficient, and the private sector in our Caribbean. Once you say the private sector is an engine of growth, you're actually making a racist argument. Mm-hmm. And that's a fact. You're making a racist argument because the people who run the private sectors are a small elite minority, racist and racial in composition. And if you have an ideology that starts with the perspective that that is the group that is going to, by its natural activities, going to transform, and I have never seen it historically in the Caribbean. Mm-hmm. Give me one historical example where the Caribbean private sector has led anything progressive in the Caribbean. Just, you have your colors online. Mm-hmm. If I'm wrong, give me one example. Have they led education? Have they led sports? Have they led science and technology? Have they led all of the things that we call great and good? It is the Caribbean public sector that has the greatest and good, the best and greatest thing ever done in our Caribbean is our education system. The next thing I would point to would be our sports and our cultural spheres. And these are where is the private sector in any of that? Where is the private sector in any of that historically? No, nowhere at all. So therefore, so tourism is the new tourism as currently constituted, with foreign-owned hotels and even racist entrance policies and those things, beach access in countries like Jamaica and so forth. It tells me that is what you're going to build a civilization on when you pay airlines to bring people. Now, when I say those kind of things, the economists object because you know why? Quite rightfully so. It's the highest form of foreign exchange, and therefore you should not be attacking the highest. But I'm looking at a larger question. Of course, we can have tourism, but we can do it in a different way. So what I'm to Airbnb, where you can have an apartment and what is happening? The dominant hotel sector are now saying, I'm putting all kind of, but there is in fact a way in which tourism can be democratized and empower the black majority. But as federally constituted, it is racist, it is exclusionary and so forth. And we should say so. Not that we are attacking tourism, we are attacking tourism in its current manifestation. Okay? So that's the kind of thing that I was doing in the book, every week trying to throw something out there to cause people to think about some of these questions.
Mm-hmm. Are there any questions from the audience?
Yes. Sean is asking, did we really achieve freedom with independence, and is becoming a republic a necessary step to achieve it?
Right. So the independence question, Sean, is that it is an ongoing activity. It's not an end point. So that independence is an ongoing activity. Why do you think America has its armies, and Britain has its armies and so forth? France has its armies. Why is Britain pulling out of the EU and so forth? Because it's an ongoing activity. So therefore, your question implies there is an end point that you say, well, how do you achieve independence? We have won the state. That's why I can go back to the state. At some point, we didn't have the instrumentality of the sovereign state in our hands. We won formal control of the instrumentality of the sovereign state in our hands, which in theory allowed us to do certain things. For example, people who want to scoff can scoff, but in Barbados, it gives you free education. Okay? In other countries, it did not. But the point is, you could not have had free education in Barbados unless somebody had won the instrumentality to put that in his hand. Now, republicanism is one step further in that project towards your self-identification, your self-respect, because that's another aspect of independence, the cultural aspect. The CCJ is another one. So you, instead of going to the Privy Council, you say the highest court. So there's a judicial aspect of independence. So I support 100% the republicanism move because I do not want the Queen of England to be my head of state because England was the most racist country that enslaved my foreparents. In fact, American tourists, when I'm out living by the beach, the first question they ask is, so why is the Queen of England your head? Because they can't understand that concept. And we take it for granted, but the Queen of England as your head of state, that is an abhorrent thing. So what the government is trying to do is to say, we have now reached that stage where we can now have our own, your head of state, the power stops with that head of state called your president. That's all. The Governor General is representing the Queen of England. We're bringing that to an end to say the highest office in the state of, the highest office in the land is the President of the Republic of Barbados. Nothing wrong with that.
Right.
In fact, if you have to move in other directions, in my view, if you're thinking about, my first question about independence is not an endpoint. Instead of moving up, let's move laterally. So the next step is widen the sovereignty to include other Caribbean countries. And that is where I think the project for the next generation should be. So that Queen of England, anyway.
That's why we call it the independent project is ongoing.
Yeah, right.
Tennyson, I don't want to give away the entire book, but because I actually want people to go and buy it, right? And you made a point earlier that there are a lot of theses in there, and it's true. When I was going through it, I was saying, students can really use this as a beginning to research or to understand a particular point and so forth, or theory. But I want to discuss a chapter on Prime Minister Miriam Motley. The chapter was written at a time when she was removed from the leadership of the party, and you noted that she had, and I want to quote, because I don't want to misrepresent your words, you say that she deliberately carved for herself a non-partisan country first space as a safe haven from which to await the unfolding of future events. And you went on to say that by adopting a stance of country before party, she had left herself sufficient elbow room to be distant from both the Barbados Party and Democratic Party, and she has left her hands free to swing in either direction, something to that effect. Well, we know where she is now. What would be your current analysis of the results of what you at the time called her makeover, and was it a good strategy?
Well, it was a good strategy when it was taken from her. Because she was isolated. She was isolated then. And Obanasa was still a powerhouse in the BLP, so she was isolated. Notice one of the things about her that has stood her in good stead. Throughout the entire period of Obanasa, she never attacked him. Right. Not once. That is why at his funeral, she never came across as a hypocrite, because she never said anything negative. In fact, she was always very respectful, because obviously she would be respectful given his history, right? So that was what I was describing then was a particular strategy at the time, where she was in political isolation. And of course, when you're in political isolation, you don't want enemies. In fact, what happened to her too was that she couldn't attack the DLP because she wanted them. In fact, people like, if you remember, Donville and them were treating her with kids' gloves, except Frendel, but Donville was. Now, in the current context now, I go back to my point about the unity thing which I raised earlier. With Setty Love, that was the ideal. She could have extended that same approach, this time on a different on a different basis. I'm now Prime Minister of the whole country. If only 2 boxes voted against you, what it means? It means the entire country is behind you. And I think for a long time she wrote that very well. In fact, not many people might recall when after they crossed the floor, she was talking to the social partnership at the time. It had just happened, and she said, events of this morning have freed me of a burden, has agreed to share the burden with me. It has freed me of a huge burden, and I'm now sharing the load. That was a telling statement to say, you know this thing with this 30 love thing? At least now, after this now, you get my logic, there's an opposition now. But I wouldn't be afraid of 30 love at all. I would have carved that image of this, because that's what she was at the time. She may still be that way, of course, now, their pockets of dissent over the same-sex marriage thing and so forth. But at the time, on that night, and for about a year and a half after, she was the whole country was behind her. And that's why I was so shocked by the reshuffle. I said, but oh gosh, man. And I think Payne said that too. Payne said, but everything was going so sweet. He sounded shocked too. My friend Trevor Prescott, I don't care what anybody said, a whole block of constituency called Pan-Africanists felt themselves. Before that, the marijuana thing, some people felt that she was dilly-dally with marijuana. So there were, as is inevitable in government, you cannot have the whole country behind you all the time. But she was in a unique position to have extended it for a long time. Of course, when the opposition comes, you want it to be organized. Like for example, her throne speech. If people want to oppose some of the things, like if people want to oppose republicanism, let them oppose republicanism. That's why that's what I'm thinking about. You can't have everybody behind you. But when I'm going with republicanism, I know that I will know who the opposition is. I can sit there and tell you who the opposition is going to be. But we can deal with that. The same way we dealt with the DLP in the general election. But I would not deliberately go and split my ranks and interfere with my ranks. And I wouldn't do it that way. I wouldn't do that way at all.
I just Terry's gonna answer the last question, but just one more point, because I keep forgetting to say, and I want to say it before I go, about the whole point of the Barbados Labour Party kind of losing the opportunity to tie Floyd to the Democratic Labour Party, and I really agree with you on that. And I just want to say, it's not really a question, it's a statement, and you can expand on it if you want. But I find like they seem to be afraid of people continually saying, well, you know, y'all keep going back to what happened. But my thing is that is what happened. So if people are saying keep going back to, because when something happens, there is a resultant effect from that. So when you remove free education, when you remove social services, when you remove this and remove that, you get something.
Yeah, I also your point, it was only 2 years ago, actually.
Yeah, it's very
and to your point, it was only 2 years ago.
It's literally just 2 years ago.
Very recent.
So then we can't. It's very, very recent. So we can't say, well, the current situation, we can't talk about it. We have to talk about it.
I would, because it is very, very recent. And I remember it was there for 2 terms. And then the other thing, the contrast is so clear. So for example, things like, I remember towards the end of the DLP, the guys couldn't fix a road. They couldn't repair the sewage problem. And then all of a sudden, you're seeing roads being repaired, new buses and so forth. So in other words, I would tie him to that. And I wouldn't be shy about going back. I would prosecute, the same way you wanted to prosecute the by-election as a referendum on me, I would prosecute the by-election I would extend the 2018 election by discussing your last amendment. Because that's what Floyd is. Floyd is actually presenting himself as a DLP representative for St. George North. And therefore, you have to tell people who the DLPs are and were. And that's how I would have fought the campaign. But I found it a little bit too defensive. And they're letting the DLP determine the narrative of the election a little too much.
Right. Okay, well, we're gonna have to finish up because we've already gone over time, but I'm gonna let Terry answer the final question.
Okay, thanks, Ayo. All right, so this is a question again, well, a question that stems really from the book. So in chapter 1, you sought to explain or critique really neoliberalism by juxtaposing it against classical and modern liberalism.
Terry really liberal to the discussion. Very good, let's do it.
I know, and you also outline in the same chapter, some of the crisis within neoliberalism. And I think and you pointed out just now in the discussion, that we have, COVID, which really does put the capitalist world order in a bit of a tailspin, given that, we really can't have this laissez-faire free market type of ideology and still have, still be able to deal effectively with the crisis, given the need for public health care and free health care for people and so on and so forth. But then you went on, also in the book, to introduce or to point towards regionalism. And in your discussion just now, you did point towards regionalism as a potential solution to the structural crisis that was happening around the time that you were writing. And I just want to take get your views on the prospect that regionalism, I mean, we don't see it as a panacea, but the prospect that it could be a potential solution to the crisis that we're facing right now with respect to, well, the twin crises that we're facing with respect to COVID and with respect to the crisis that is within the neoliberal world order.
Okay. All right. So the chapter you referred to actually was kind of funny. There's a particular gentleman, I mentioned him in the book. Every week I wrote on neoliberalism, he would attack me.
Yes.
Every week, and he did every week. So I took that day. I was, what I do when people attack me, I take them seriously. I don't assume that they're doing it maliciously. Right. I assume that they're doing it for want of information. So I was trying to explain to him the difference between neoliberalism and liberalism. Mm-hmm. Our Caribbean independence project springs from liberalism. So in other words, Jeremy Bentham, so the argument you're raising about what is the appropriate level of intervention of a state? And Bentham had this whole thing about the greatest happiness for the greatest number, and that when there is suffering, there's a legitimate way in which you balance pains with pleasure. So if there is suffering, the state would have a legitimate way to intervene and resolve that. Not that it's going to be totally statist, because too much state is a problem. That's a general liberal principle, that if the state is overbearing and controlling everybody, then that's the problem. But the early liberals, the 19th century liberals, never had a problem with understanding that the role of the state is to minimize pain and maximize pleasure. Right. So if I see that's why in England you had the so-called poor laws, the very welfare state emerged out of that. Now in our Caribbean, when the Moyne Commission came down, the Moyne Commission was using liberal principles and Benthamite principles to say no schools, no water, poor housing. Mm-hmm. The Caribbean state should be spending more and so forth. That's why I am a social democrat. What's neoliberalism now? Neoliberalism doesn't start from that point of view. Neoliberalism starts from the point of view that all freedom is market freedom. So the very idea of freedom, which is a liberal concept, has been conflated to market freedom. So in other words, the real danger is the state. The early liberals didn't start, Bentham and them didn't start that way. And that's the problem, that's the danger I see. So a lot of what I'm trying to do is to guard against, let me give you an example. So my daughter who's much earlier, very much younger, they're watching CBC TV one day and say, CBC should be privatized. Now, that child never did any economics. So where that language come from? So privatization is a very complex question in economics. But the fact that a little 7-year-old, because the CBC thing as a little fuzz and thing, would say privatize CBC means that it's an ideological notion. It has to be an ideological notion because she didn't study econ anyway. You get my logic? So very often, a lot of what passes as discussed is a kind of ideological, like the same with the Christian, Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. That's an ideological, I'm not attacking the Christians, I'm just telling you, it's an ideological position, right? Now, so what we have to do now is extract from that the nonsense. You say, so then you say, so when I ask her, so I said to her, so what happened now? So when you start seeing things on American TV that say black people are monkeys, so privatize CBC? You get my logic? So there are non-economic things to do with protecting a majority and so forth that a state can do. So seeing myself on my TV, having us discuss our issues, these are so that's not this economics. That has nothing to do with money and whether the TV has fuzz and thing on it. You get my logic? So these are the wider things I think that we have to guard against neoliberalism, because it's a market freedom argument that has taken out the thing about pain and so forth. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now the regionalism thing, Terry, it is inevitable as part of the logic of our post-colonial development. So when I wrote that article, I remember I was writing in response to former central bank governor Barbados, who had written a good analysis on what he said Barbados should do to overcome its economic. So all I wrote and said was, but he made all of those prescriptions, and not once did he mention regionalism. Right. Because my view is after the Barbados state has done everything about it, after the Barbados state as a 166 square mile piece of territory with 270,000 people, has done everything it can do with tourism and education. What else is there for it to do? How else can it enlarge it? You get my logic? And all the Caribbean countries are facing the same thing. So it's either we agree that we're going to stay in this little isolated thing alone, or eventually we begin to ask questions about. So that's why the OECS is such a promising regional experiment, because what they've done, they've now moved to a single economy, and they're doing it for the same reason I told you, almost organically and naturally. Nobody's imposing that on them. So when I go to Dominica or Grenada, my passport is stamped indefinite. I'm always so proud of that. That I can enter Grenada and see my thing stamped indefinite stay. That happened overnight, without any fanfare, without any that happened just like that. And I think it's a logical thing. So after you integrate economically, you have to now integrate. You have to start figuring. Of course, it's down the road politically and so forth, right? So Mayor Motley could be the Prime Minister of Barbados and the OECS. You understand my logic? And I can have oil, I can have Trinidad oil and so forth. And all of that then enlarges us. So our graduates can now go and work and live anywhere and so forth. So that's it's not a pipe dream. It was, as a matter of fact, why it's not a pipe dream? Because you had it already, which is the saddest thing about our region. Sometimes very often, we tend to forget. I remember the guys in Grenada were always saying, you know, they had their own appellate court in Grenada during the Grenada Revolution. In 2.5 years, it's only when Prime Minister Tillman Thomas came to Barbados and said that to us. It occurred to me. So all of them talk about CCJ, and we can go to CCJ. But he said, but we had that already. Little Grenada on its own during the revolution. Right. They are some of the best jurists. So very often people talk as if something is impossible. When it happened, how can something that happened already be impossible? In fact, that's the way so-called prophecy works in the Bible, you know. You discuss something that happened already, and they tell you it will happen. So if I say, a man will run at 9.2 seconds, if the whole population is fat, and they can't run, that might sound like a pipe. But if you go back to history, you say, but when Usain Bolt did it and so forth, then you realize, but the man not prophesying, the man is just talking about something that happened already, and if it happened once, it can happen again. But anyway, thank you for having me. I had lots of fun.
Joseph, thank you so much. Listen, you know that I can go on with you all night. You understand? But we promised people 2 hours. The audiences are actually leaving, but we're gonna finish up because we have to leave something for next week. But thank you so much for coming. I just want to remind people that they can get Tennyson's book, Defending Caribbean Freedom. Terry, you're gonna have to show it because my background is in.
Let me show it. Also, again, the book is Defending Caribbean Freedom, available at the bookstore at University of West Indies. And where else can we get the book?
At Caribbean Publications Inc. And you can send it to my email. Send me an email. I have a few copies, and if I need more copies, I can always get them from Father Babbitt and sell them to you.
What is your email?
It's TJoe. It's actually at the end of my weekly articles. TJoe 2008 at live.com. TJoe at live.com. And thank you for having me as your first guest. But obviously I can't come too often because I will get stale and so forth. But maybe once every 2 years, I can probably come and say something.
Every 2 years. Now we have you a little bit more often than that, but not very regularly. We won't overdo it. But I also want to thank the audience. You guys have been great. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your comments. I'm sorry I couldn't read every single one. But you know, that's how it goes. We're gonna try to stay within the time going forward because going over 2 hours is really stretching it a bit. We're 22 minutes past the time that we agreed to. So thank you so much for staying with us. Great. Have a good night. Terry, anything else before I go?
Well, that's it. I just want to thank yourself and Tennyson for, our first show. I think we did a good job. And
thank you for handling all of this.
You're welcome.
And thank you so much. All right, bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.